Was the Hanging Gardens of Babylon built in the wrong city? That question exists because this wonder behaves unlike any other in the ancient world. It is spoken of with absolute confidence, yet it refuses to sit still under scrutiny. There are no ruins to point at, no foundations to walk through, no unmistakable remains rising from the soil. What survives instead are descriptions written long after the gardens were said to exist, by people who never saw them and relied on second-hand information. That gap between fame and evidence is not a small historical inconvenience. It is the fault line where the entire mystery begins, because history rarely allows something so grand to vanish without explanation. From the very beginning, the Hanging Gardens feel unstable as a historical idea. They are remembered as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, yet they are the only one that cannot be physically verified. The Great Pyramid still dominates the Giza Plateau. Fragments of the statue of Zeus were recorded and described in detail. The ruins of the Temple of Artemis were excavated. Even the Colossus of Rhodes, destroyed by earthquake, left traces and documentation. But the Hanging Gardens, described as vast, layered, and engineered to defy nature itself, left nothing that can be confidently identified. That absence alone forces a deeper and more uncomfortable question. How does something so extraordinary disappear so completely? To understand why this matters, it helps to step back and remember how the 7 wonders came to be defined. The list was not created by the civilizations that built these structures. It was assembled by Greek writers who traveled, listened, and imagined. Their goal was not precision in the modern sense. They were cataloging marvels, not conducting archaeological surveys. The 7 wonders were meant to represent the limits of what humans could achieve, places that inspired or rather than demanded verification. A living mountain of trees rising above the flat, dry Mesopotamian plain would have felt almost supernatural to an outside observer accustomed to stone temples and marble statues. This matters because it frames how the Hanging Gardens were remembered. They were never introduced as a technical blueprint or a construction record. They were introduced as an idea, nature elevated by human will. Ancient descriptions speak of terraces stacked one upon another, of soil deep enough to support full-grown trees, of water flowing continuously upward to feed greenery in a climate that should not allow it. Even today, that image feels improbable. In the ancient world, it would have felt miraculous. According to later accounts, this impossible structure stood in Babylon, one of the most famous cities of the ancient Near East. Babylon was already legendary long before the Hanging Gardens entered the story. It was known for its massive walls, its monumental gates, and its religious architecture that reached skyward. To later writers, Babylon was the perfect stage for a wonder that felt larger than life. They claimed the gardens were built during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, one of the most powerful kings of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The most famous version of the story adds a deeply human element. Nebuchadnezzar, it is said, built the gardens for his wife, who came from a mountainous region and longed for the greenery of her homeland. To ease her homesickness, the king ordered the creation of an artificial mountain filled with trees, flowing water, and shade. This version of the story has endured for centuries because it transforms imperial power into something personal. It suggests that even rulers who commanded armies and cities were motivated by love and longing. But emotionally satisfying stories are not the same as reliable history. When historians began examining Babylonian records, the romance started to unravel. Nebuchadnezzar II was obsessive about documentation. His inscriptions survive in large numbers, carved into stone and pressed into clay. He described temples, palaces, city walls, canals, and even repairs in painstaking detail. He named materials, praised gods, and celebrated his own achievements repeatedly. Yet nowhere in these records does he mention the Hanging Gardens. For a ruler so focused on legacy, the absence of such a monumental project is not merely strange. It is deeply unsettling. At first, some scholars dismissed this silence as coincidence. Perhaps the records were lost. Perhaps the relevant inscription had not yet been found. But as decades of excavation passed, the silence remained. Babylon was extensively excavated beginning in the late 19th century. Archaeologists uncovered palaces, administrative buildings, temples, fortifications, and residential districts. They mapped the city with increasing precision. Yet no structure emerged that could reasonably support the weight and complexity described in ancient accounts of the gardens. The problem grows larger when we examine the sources that actually describe the gardens. Every detailed account comes from Greek or Roman writers who lived centuries after the gardens were supposedly built. None claimed to have seen them. Instead, they relied on older texts that no longer exist, traveler stories, and oral traditions. Each retelling introduced room for misunderstanding, exaggeration, or embellishment. Over time, repetition hardened uncertainty into confidence. What began as it is said slowly became it was. Diodorus Siculus offered one of the most vivid descriptions. He described ascending terraces supported by stone columns, with soil deep enough for large trees. Water, he claimed, was lifted from the Euphrates River and distributed throughout the structure by hidden mechanisms. Strabo emphasized the irrigation system, praising the ingenuity required to keep the gardens alive. Philo of Byzantium focused on the engineering itself, marveling at how water was made to flow upward against gravity. Together, these accounts painted a picture of a structure that required constant maintenance, immense resources, and advanced technical knowledge. Yet when archaeologists searched for physical evidence in Babylon, they found none of the required infrastructure. No foundations capable of supporting massive terraces filled with soil and trees. No irrigation system powerful enough to continuously lift water to elevated levels. No channels or mechanisms that matched the scale described by ancient writers. In a city where even modest structures left traces, the total absence of the gardens became increasingly difficult to explain away. Some explanations attempt to preserve the Babylonian location. Earthquakes are often suggested, as are floods or changes in the course of the Euphrates River. Others argue that later construction may have erased all traces. While these explanations are possible in isolation, they weaken when compared to the survival of other Babylonian structures exposed to the same forces. Walls, temples, and canals endured. The idea that only the Hanging Gardens vanished without a trace begins to feel less like coincidence and more like misdirection. As doubts accumulated, scholars began to consider a more unsettling possibility. What if the problem was not that the gardens were destroyed, but that they were never in Babylon to begin with? This question leads north, to the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, and to a king whose records look very different from Nebuchadnezzar's. Under King Sennacherib, Nineveh became one of the most technologically advanced cities of its time. Unlike Nebuchadnezzar, Sennacherib explicitly described his gardens in inscriptions that still survive. He wrote about creating vast landscaped gardens filled with plants collected from across his empire. He described bringing water from distant mountains through canals, aqueducts, and mechanical lifting systems. These were not vague boasts. They were detailed accounts of engineering projects designed to transform the city itself. Archaeology supports these claims in ways Babylon never did. Massive aqueducts have been discovered near Nineveh, including stone structures built specifically to transport water over long distances. The Jerwan Aqueduct, in particular, stands as one of the earliest known aqueducts in history. Its construction demonstrates a level of hydraulic engineering fully capable of supporting large-scale garden systems. Even more striking are the palace reliefs from Nineveh. These carved stone panels depict terrace gardens filled with trees, flowing water, and architectural features that closely resemble Greek descriptions of the Hanging Gardens. Water appears to flow through elevated channels. Trees grow atop layered structures. Visually, these images align far more closely with the classical descriptions than anything found in Babylon. Language may explain how the confusion began. In ancient Mesopotamian usage, Babylon could function symbolically, referring to a great or glorious city rather than a precise geographic location. Greek writers unfamiliar with the political geography of the region may have attached Nineveh's wonders to Babylon's name simply because Babylon carried greater symbolic weight in their cultural imagination. Over time, repetition turned assumption into certainty. This reframes the mystery entirely. The Hanging Gardens may not be fictional, but misplaced. A real achievement of ancient engineering may have been credited to the wrong city as stories traveled across cultures and centuries. Still, not all scholars agree. Differences in scale, layout, and description leave room for debate, and the evidence, while compelling, is not absolute. History rarely offers certainty. It offers probabilities. The deeper lesson goes beyond a single monument. Ancient writers valued symbolism and meaning as much as accuracy. A garden that represented power, abundance, and humanity's ability to bend nature fit perfectly into their worldview. Whether it stood in Babylon or Nineveh mattered less than what it represented. Over time, that meaning outlived the facts themselves. Modern archaeology forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how knowledge survives. Absence of evidence is not proof of absence, but repetition is not proof of truth. The Hanging Gardens expose how fame can overshadow fact, and how certain ideas persist simply because they feel right, not because they are proven. If the gardens truly belong to Nineveh, they represent a lost Assyrian legacy, overshadowed by Babylon's fame and rediscovered only through careful scholarship. If they never existed at all, they demonstrate the extraordinary power of belief to construct monuments that words alone can sustain. Either way, the gardens endure as a test of how we think about history itself. This is why questions like this matter, and why History of Questions exists. Not to deliver simple answers, but to examine how answers are formed, repeated, and challenged. The Hanging Gardens survive not as ruins, but as a reminder that history is built as much from questions as from stone. If you value ideas that survive trends, subscribe. Whether myth, misplaced history, or something in between, the Hanging Gardens remain a wonder not because we can see them, but because they continue to force better questions. And sometimes, the questions themselves are the most enduring structures humanity ever builds.